This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, back by popular demand, Daniel Greenfield, Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and he is the editor/writer at the blog The Point at frontpagemag.com. Daniel Greenfield, welcome back to the Glazov Gang.
Thanks for having me on again.
Thank you. Always a pleasure and an honor to have you here. Daniel, fascinating article you wrote, Don't Make the Muslims Angry, at Front Page Mag this week. Just another brilliant masterpiece. Thank you so much, Daniel. I want to discuss a few things you wrote in there that we really don't find in our media. You discuss how recently U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry traveled to the Muslim country of Jordan to assure its foreign minister that Jews would not be praying at the holiest site in Judaism. This is Muslim segregationist racism, and as you point out, it's allowed because it's Muslim racism against Jews, and that's the racism that the Obama administration allows and supports.
The Obama administration is very much biased for Muslims and against non-Muslims. It's especially true in Israel, where right now this is a conflict between the Muslim Brotherhood's Islamist movement in Israel, which is orchestrating the attacks on Jews, the stabbing attacks, and it's asserting the idea that Muslims have superior rights to part of Israel, and that's what they've been doing all along.
Daniel, for our viewers, just give us a very quick lesson on what the Temple Mount is.
The significance of the Temple Mount, it's the ultimate sacred site of Judaism. It's the site of the temples. It's the place where God interacted with man. It's the place where God's presence rested within Judaism. So it's the connection literally between heaven and earth.
What is the Temple Mount for Muslims?
For Muslims, it's supposedly the place that Muhammad took a flying horse with a woman's head, and he rode over to what they call the farthest mosque. It's not at all clear if that was even a reference to Jerusalem. And this was really a story that was told quite a while back. Muhammad certainly personally never made it to Israel. The New York Times decided to so-called fact-check whether the temples existed on the site, even though there's really no dispute on that whatsoever. They didn't get around to fact-checking whether Muhammad rode a flying horse there. They didn't get around to doing that.
Just a sec. A flying horse and a woman's head?
Yes. There's a flying horse with a woman's head. Don't ask me about it. It's Muslim mythology. I don't think they actually exist, but, I wouldn't want to be Islamophobic.
Okay, let's not get too Islamophobic. What does the Temple Mount mean for Christians?
Well, for Christians, certainly it's part of biblical history, which is certainly a part of Christianity. So
for Jewish people, is it okay for them if Muslims or even Christians or anyone comes and maybe prays there?
Well, certainly Israel has not stopped it. More than that, they've allowed the Muslim mosque on there to continue existing. They certainly have not interfered with it, except when there was violence, when Muslims threw down large and heavy rocks down on Jewish worshippers below, when there were firebombs and so on.
But Muslims do not want Jews praying at their own holiest site, and this is actually the state of things right now.
Yeah, that is the status quo. The status quo went under the Muslim conquest. It's still the status quo. It's the status quo that Kerry insists on enforcing.
Tell us about the Dome of the Rock that the Muslims built on top of the Temple Mount.
Well, people have called the Ground Zero Mosque the Victory Mosque because there's a common path in Islam where a conquered territory that's an important place, it's a sacred site to a group of people. When Muslims conquer it, they put a mosque on there, and they say this is now an Islamic site.
So Daniel, the status quo is that Jewish people cannot pray at their holiest site, and the American government supports Jewish people not being allowed to pray at the Temple Mount simply because they're Jews.
Exactly. They support the superiority of Muslim rights to a Jewish holy site.
But if we were to be against racism and bigotry and segregationist racism, how does this fit by accepting and promoting, as John Kerry did, the fact that Jews cannot enter their own holiest site and pray there?
Well, the consistent pattern of this administration has been that it has prioritized Muslim rights over the rights of everybody else. So it does this with the Temple Mount, but it also insists that the parts of Jerusalem which were conquered by a Muslim invasion and ethnically cleansed of Jews, the synagogue was blown up, the Jews were driven out, that this now is Muslim property, that Jews have no rights to it whatsoever, and that when a Jew moves into a home in East Jerusalem, that it's now a settlement, even though the world. They've done this with other peoples too, non-Jews. They've done this with Christians in the Middle East. They've done this elsewhere. The idea is that Muslim rights come before everybody else's rights.
So Daniel, in the American past, there was a sad, tragic era, full of injustice that we would denounce today, when there were separate water fountains, when there were separate bathrooms, where black people had to use this water fountain and white people had to use this water fountain. That was wrong, and America fixed that, and we denounce something like that. But am I correct that Jewish people have been attacked for drinking out of a certain Islamic water fountain when they have visited the Temple Mount?
That's indeed true. Jewish visitors to the Temple Mount who attempted to use the water fountain were attacked. They were berated for it. You've got the president of the PLO talking about Jews coming onto the Temple Mount with their filthy feet. There's a very racist undercurrent to this kind of dialogue.
So what statements did Obama make to denounce this calling of Jewish people as having filthy feet and denouncing Jewish people not being allowed to drink out of a certain water fountain?
Not only did Obama have no objection to it, his administration is upholding the status quo under which Jews have few, if any, rights in the Temple Mount.
Daniel, so in the context of what's happening right now, Palestinian sheiks and clerics and muftis, they're holding knives, they're saying stab the Jew, and Palestinians are getting together in demonstrations screaming stab the Jew, and John Kerry shows up and says, the Jews won't be praying at the Temple Mount, we promise. How? You would think that people holding knives saying stab the Jew, they should somehow be the ones put into check and criticized. How is this? Why are Jews being, now it's because Jews might be praying at the Temple Mount. I mean, what kind of paradigm is this?
Well, it can't be the fault of the Muslims. We know that. Kerry's first response to the outbreak of violence was to say there was the fault of the settlements, by which he means Jews living in houses. Muslims living in houses, of course, is no problem. Jews living in houses is a problem. So his first response was to blame the Jews for being stabbed by Muslims. Now there's a new reason to blame Jews for being stabbed by Muslims.
Daniel, let's finish with this. My whole life, until this day, I'm surrounded by a lot of leftists. And typical conversation, we've got to stop the racism. And then I say to them, oh, that's great, you're against racism. Just recently, Jewish people have rocks thrown at them at the Temple Mount because they drank out of a certain water fountain that they're not allowed to drink out of. They're not allowed to pray at their holiest site simply because they're Jewish. Can you join an effort to stop this segregationist Muslim racism? And they just look deathly ill and pale, do not say a word, and do not want to get involved. Can you speak on this, please?
It's a double standard. It's a completely insane double standard. For example, the New York Times will run a piece, an op-ed openly calling for the ethnic cleansing of around 400,000 Jews from parts of Israel, and there's no problem. The Washington Post would never accept an op-ed calling for the ethnic cleansing of 100,000 Muslims or really anybody else. It's a very insane situation. It's a double standard. And again, the premise of the double standard is that everything that Muslims do is right, and that if other people are victimized, somehow the victims are to blame for it.
Daniel, what lies underneath this pernicious hypocrisy and double standard?
The central idea is that it's anti-American, it's anti-Israel, it's anti-Western, it's anti-civilizational. It's that these people are the victims, the Muslims are the victims, and that if anything happens, if anything bloody happens, if an atrocity happens, it's the victims, it's the Americans, it's the Israelis, it's the Christians who are to blame for it because they somehow provoked this attack on themselves.
Daniel Greenfield, thank you for joining the Glazov gang.
Thank you for having me on.
Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Greenfield's blog is called The Point. You can find it at frontpagemag.com. It is the best blog in the universe. I read it every day. You should as well. Daniel, we'll see you soon.
Parts of the galaxy, at least. Hope so.
Awesome. Please, if you like this show, go to jamieglazov.com and support us. And you better be subscribed to our YouTube channel. And we'll see you on the next edition of the Glazov Gang. Good night.